And of course, just in view of the fact that on Thursday, headlines screamed across Kenya and of course in diaspora of the massacre in Garissa, we are joined in studio tonight by the chair of the National Psychological Association, Dr. Gladys Mwiti. She's a trauma expert. Dr. Mwiti, Kenya has hardly come to terms with the Westgate attack. And what I want to ask you is that there have been countless attacks in the country of such a nature, maybe not of such gravity, but what are you doing for the affected currently?
Currently, we are repeating exactly the same operation we had in Westgate. Westgate taught us a lot of things. We had a seamless operation in terms of receiving the survivors and taking them through trauma support, which actually we call psychological first aid, meeting their needs at the moment. And actually for Westgate, we had like a 6-month program where we were able to assess those who were affected little, affected a lot, and the more they were affected, the longer the intervention for them became. And that again was picked from the 1998 bombing, because actually I and a few others coordinated 1998 bombing. So this time we were ready. And with the Kenya government, we set up at Nyayo Stadium. Of course, the bodies were being viewed at Chiromo mortuary, and then Nyayo Stadium was the headquarters of the operation of receiving relatives who are looking for their children, and so on and so forth. And then we repeated exactly the same, where they come and go through the list. Is my child alive? Is my child traveling? Then we give them the psychological first aid support, lowering the anxiety and affirming to them that there is hope, connecting them to supports. And then the welfare section of the government took over in terms of those who wanted to travel, needed to sleep somewhere as they waited for their children. So it was a seamless program, really heavily supported by the government at Nyayo Stadium.
And this attack, Dr. Mwiti, has happened in an institution of higher learning. And the question I want to put across to you is for the parents who give their children to these institutions of higher learning and hope that their children will be safe and believe that their children will be safe. Just the news that their children are no more, just learning that their children's lives have been lost in such a heinous way.
Yes.
How do you talk to them? What do you say in a situation like this? What are you telling them?
Actually, the wounds and the grief is so deep, and the loss sincerely felt. Like the father who was talking of, like, this was my only child. Look at my hands. I worked hard to take him through school. So actually, our role is not to tell them much. When someone is grieving, you don't lecture to them. They don't need a lecture. What they need is your presence, to ask, how are you doing? How are you coping? How have you coped with things like this in the past? The person may say, oh, I've got my grandma. I talk to them when I'm distressed. Have you talked to your grandma since this happened? Okay, or I go to church, I pray. How much are you connected with the church community? So we elevate areas of coping that they already have. We may add things like self-care. So when you go home now, remember, sleep is very important. Because if you don't sleep, you won't even have the mental capacity to handle everything. Eat well, drink water, exercise. Simple little things of self-care that help the person to remain strong. And then social support. Connect with friends. Don't hide away and feel different in your room. Connect with friends. Allow them to come and visit you. And then we tell people, when you go to people who are grieving, don't lecture to them. Don't tell them simplistic things like, oh, God chose the best, or whatever. Please, don't tell them things. Listen to them. Be there for them. Let them talk about their children and the memories, good memories they have of the departed. That is the way to support grieving people, and that's basically what we do. And then for those who are really affected, we may ask them, we have got their telephone numbers, to come again for another session and another session, and we keep checking how they are doing until they are able to move on with life once again.
And I want to talk, I want to zero in on a specific case, the 19-year-old who says that she hid for 2 days and had to drink lotion to survive. And for a child like this that has to go, I'll call her a child because I remember when I was in campus and the dreams and the hopes that I had, and just you know, how innocent you are at this age, and the fact that she's looking forward to a future, and that trauma, and coming out of that trauma for her, who is expectant and had to drink lotion because she says she was thirsty and she was hiding and had to do all manner of things, play dead and what have you. For somebody like this, when they come to you, and I'm sure there are many others who may not be able to speak out, because not everybody is able to speak out of the trauma they've experienced. What is the best way forward for you as a psychologist, in terms of just addressing what it is they will do to just pick the pieces together and move forward?
The best thing we underline is hope for tomorrow. The strengths of the person. Oh my gosh, you were strong. You survived it. What made you go through? It's because I was determined I was not going to die. I have a future for me and for my baby. The whole change takes place in the mind, recognition. Because when the person begins to say, I can give thanks that I'm alive right now, I am happy that I'm strong enough to survive, those are the things we pick and we underline. Because then they realize, I survived for a purpose. What's the purpose for me and my baby? And that mindset begins to lift their distress and gives them strength to actually go back to school, complete their education, and move on with life. So hope, and then the survival instinct in the person, we underline that strength. They don't come from a position of weakness. They come from a position of strength.
Okay, and now Dr. Mwiti, how do we as a nation reconcile over the deaths of 147 innocent lives? And just looking at the fact that survivors, the over 600 of the Garissa University students that survived this grisly attack, you know, who are glad to be alive, they're trying to pick up their pieces. And of course now looking at the fact that yes, 147 lives have been lost, and there's a lot of anger across the nation. And of course, like I said earlier, just trying to reconcile from the Westgate attack and not really having come to terms with that, and then this happens. We as a nation, what do we need to do? What is our mindset supposed to be at a time like this?
The most important thing, Lillian, is that we need to recognize that Kenya is a resilient nation. This young lady I talked about just now, the strength in her is what we call resiliency. You are stretched, and when the stress is over, you go back to your strength, right? Kenya is a resilient nation. Let's underline that many times, all the way from Mau Mau, post-election violence. I'm not excusing any of these traumas, but I'm saying we are a strong nation. We hang in together. And so the worst thing we can do as a nation right now is to think we are weak. By the way this attack came, riding on the wonderful State of the Nation speech by the President, Kenya is going places. We are a strong nation. And so we need to be very careful that we don't allow pessimism, that, oh, we are done. We are not done. Kenya will survive through this. We've survived through many things before. But having said that, is that we need to actually critically address radicalization. We need to address terrorism. We need to address the fact that there are some Kenyans within the country, like you heard in the news today, who actually helped in the planning of this. So what I want to propose is that the Kenyan government, and by the way, we should not discuss these things in public domain. This is not the time for politicians to stand there and say should. The Kenyan government could put together a task force of experts, from security to mental health, psychological, leaders, whoever it is, and actually address the way forward for this nation. We need trauma healing and reconciliation as a nation. We have a conference, for example, coming in August, which we didn't plan because of the attack. But the conference we have is an international trauma conference. I serve on the International Board of Traumatic Stress Studies as one of the members of the board of directors. And they are helping us for the first time to bring an international conference to Kenya, because Kenya is a focused nation in terms of rising in our economy. Now, we cannot rise in our economy when we have the threat of trauma. So the theme of the conference is traumatic stress is a threat to mental health, to peace, and to development. I've been invited by African Union twice now to speak on radicalization and psychological, what goes on in the mind. I've been invited to speak on terrorism in Algiers, Congo, Brazzaville. African Union are addressing mental health policies in this nation. And so basically what I'm saying is that as a nation, we shall survive this, but to survive it together with an optimistic and not a pessimistic mind.
Okay, and final question, Dr. Mwiti, as we wind up. Critics have it that our security forces, our forces that have the upper hand, are more reactive than preventive in the measures that they have put across. Is it time Kenyan forces withdraw their forces from Somalia in the near future? Those are some of the options that have been put across. A lot of people, of course, saying that the displaying of 4 terrorists killed during the operation in Garissa is not really a solution, but is actually sparking more anger and more hatred and fueling even more. What are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts about this is that I think the government, in its own wisdom, right now, whatever we have done with Somalia has come from the wisdom of the government. But that's why I said a task force could sit together and examine where we have been, where we are, and where we are going. It is not demand stop or demand do. It should be an educated decision-making process, sitting on the table. In this nation, we have wonderfully gifted, educated, experienced men and women. A select group of those people sitting on the table truly will come up with a decision of the way forward for this nation. And I'm sure the president would welcome that, and I would advise that's the way we should go. Because Kenya, we are going places as a nation, but we need to look at things that may pull us back so that we don't come and regret we were rising and then we fell because we are not wise enough to see the elements that might threaten our progress.
Dr. Gladys Mwiti, Chair, National Psychological Association, of course, giving us her professional thoughts on this matter, and of course just talking to us on what is being done in terms of addressing the trauma that the 147 victims' families are going through currently. And of course we continue once again as Citizen TV to condole with all the affected families. We'll be right back. Stay with Citizen TV. Lots more coming your way.